Welcome to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm your host, Jay Daniels. Thanks for spending some time with us. Recently, we visited with pianist and composer Deanna Witkowski. Her own journey has led her to a new home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which was also home to another renowned pianist, Mary Lou Williams. Deanna discusses how she is telling Mary Lou's story through her latest writings and recordings. We'll also hear about the influence of Deanna's faith and how that has helped bring others together through her musical gifts. Our story begins with a look back at Deanna's family.
My mom is originally from the Buffalo area. My late father was from Boston, and I have 3 siblings, all younger. We are very spaced apart, and I would say I'm the most responsible one, which means I'm the oldest. And then I have a brother who's like about 5.5 years younger, and another brother who's quite a bit younger, and a sister who's about 18 years younger than I am.
Were any of your family members musically inclined?
Yeah, so it's interesting because both my parents apparently played instruments before I was born, and I didn't really hear them play so much growing up. So my dad played a little bit of jazz guitar. My mom played violin, and she played fairly seriously, but when she was in college, she kind of stopped. She was an art major. So there was definitely artistic influence in the family, but not a lot of like growing up listening to either of them play.
Was there music that you heard around your home? I mean, with parents who had played in the past, surely they still shared some of that through recordings.
Yeah, well, I listened to a lot of classical music. I mean, I was a classical piano major in college, and growing up, I took classical piano and flute. And I also listened to, starting when I was in maybe like 5th or 6th grade, I listened to contemporary Christian music. So at that time, I mean, I was listening to like Amy Grant, Michael W. Smith, and not listening to jazz really, but definitely listening to and playing classical music.
Let's focus on the piano for a moment. When did you discover your love for the piano? Like, when did you first start playing the piano?
And when I was in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher had a piano in our classroom, and she used to play it. And I vaguely have this picture, I don't know if it's right, but accurate, I should say, of where the upright was and sitting on the floor and singing. And she told my mother that she thought it was musical and that I should maybe take some lessons on an instrument. So we did not have a piano in my home at that point. We had this little 2.5 or 3 octave keyboard that was called an organaire, AIRE was the ending. And it had different colored buttons, like white and black buttons to play major and minor chords in your left hand. And then the keys were not full-size keys. And that's what I started on. Like, my mom had some beginning piano books from when she had played as a kid, and she taught me a little bit from that. And I just kind of kept going. So I don't remember the very, very beginnings of it, but I do remember the moves that we made. Like, because as I mentioned earlier, we moved a bunch of times. So when we lived in Western Pennsylvania in this town called Sagertown outside of Meadville, and we were way out on a dirt road in the middle of the country. Sometimes neighbors' horses would come in our yard, and that's where I started taking piano lessons. And my mom got a studio upright that someone was just almost going to throw out for like $50. And that's the instrument that I had like all through high school. So at that house, I remember playing all the time.
You are well known as a jazz composer, a performer, an arranger, etc. But you mentioned in your teen years that you were not listening to jazz. You were listening to CCM, you were listening to classical, other genres. So when is it that you discovered jazz, even while living on an old dirt road in Western Pennsylvania?
Well, When I was in 11th grade, and by this time we were living in the Rochester, New York area in Webster on the east side of town. And I was playing flute pretty seriously, as well as piano, and, playing in like every musical group in school, accompanying Little Shop of Horrors or Annie or whatever musical we were doing, because I was always a great sight reader. And I decided I wanted to be in jazz band. I didn't know anything about it. So I played in our school's jazz band for 2 years. And the only thing I really knew about jazz was that musicians were supposed to play some notes that weren't written on the score. So I went to my director, and because I read everything, everything was written out like a full piano score. So I could still realize the part, but I knew I was supposed to improvise something, and I didn't really know how to do that. And so I went to my director, and unfortunately at the time, he wasn't really a jazz player. He was a great musician himself, but he gave me a page out of Jamie Aebersold, which was like, it's this, method of teaching where it had like a blues scale, and it had notes that were blackened in were the notes that were supposed to sound good on a particular chord. So he said, well, you can play the black notes. And that was the only direction that I got, which wasn't enough. So then I had two friends, a guitarist and a trumpet player, in jazz band with me, and they listened to jazz. And I started like hanging out with them before school. We would listen to jazz a little bit. And then they took me to some concerts at the Eastman School of Music, where I heard their jazz ensemble. And that's when I really felt like, wow, this music, it's so cool, because not only are people improvising, but I loved the harmonies. They seem really rich, and there was like this interaction happening between musicians, this conversation that I didn't feel as much in the other music that I was playing. So when I went off to college, to Wheaton College outside of Chicago, I was a classical major. We had no jazz program, but we did have a jazz band and an adjunct professor named Larry Piniella, who was a great tenor saxophonist. And since I had played flute and saxophone have similar fingerings, I thought, I want to learn about jazz. I'm going to take saxophone lessons. So that's when I started, really had someone who said, go get this Miles Davis recording or Charlie Parker recording or Bill Evans or Errol Garner or whoever. That's when I really started listening. And that's when I really fell in love with the music.
As we're more or less discovering your own history, your upbringing as far as music is concerned, there is another element that I want to introduce, and this is one that I'm always happy to learn about from other jazz musicians, and that is the influence of your own spiritual beliefs, your faith. Because not only do you compose works for secular jazz, but you also include a sacred element, not only for instrumentalists, but also for choral works. So let's dig at this element a little bit. How did you begin what you might call your faith journey?
Well, even though my family moved so much, my mom always took us to church, no matter whether we had a car on a Sunday or not. So sometimes that meant going to the closest church. So we didn't always stay in, say, like the Baptist church or the Methodist church. We moved around. But I always, my mom has a very deep faith. And I definitely remember certain points at church where I made decisions about how I wanted to live my life and how I wanted to follow God. And that included my music. It's interesting because looking back now, I mentioned earlier, listening to, say, people like Amy Grant, especially when I was in high school, I really wanted to be Amy Grant for a while. And I did start writing more songs in college. I mean, they weren't necessarily always songs about faith, but that's just been like part of what I do in my writing. And I also find I've been a music director at several different churches in New York City. And in those positions, I was working with choirs or with singers or looking at text a lot or working with hymn tunes. And I always wanted to reflect the text in my arrangements or deepen the text. Or so, I've always worked with text, whether it's a pop tune or writing like a more contemporary classical choral piece. And along the way, I went to Wheaton College, which is a Christian college. I started attending an Episcopal church when I was there. I worked full-time at an Episcopal church in New York City at All Angels Church in the late 90s as music director. And long journey, but in 2009, I converted to Catholicism. And that really came a lot from reading. It came a lot from reading people like Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day and Walker Percy and going on silent retreats and finding my path that way. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about that.
Thinking about your journey, just how does your faith guide you in those things?
Well, I think as much as I'm going to say this and then think, wow, am I really good at this? Because I don't think I am. But I think that the overarching thing is that realizing on some level or trusting that God is taking care of my life. And that means that I am going to be okay no matter what happens. And so it also means that I can, that I believe that if there's desires, really, deep desires of my heart, my life, whatever, which playing the piano or moving to Pittsburgh, which I recently did, which kept becoming more apparent, or, things like that. I believe that God is guiding me in those things. So kind of trying to stay aware of God, in the present moment with me, and recognizing that going towards the things that I love, even though it can feel scary and risky and lonely sometimes, that God is going to take care of me in that, no matter what my circumstances might be.
You have been given a great gift in your musical talents. Do you feel that this is indeed your calling in life?
Yes, I definitely do. I think a lot of musicians, don't always feel like we have a choice of what we do, but you do. Realistically, you can decide, yeah, I want to keep doing this or not. I can keep pursuing this or not. But there's not I never had a moment of, it wasn't like in college, even deciding what my major would be. It's I'm a pianist. I'm taking piano. I'm going to be a classical piano major. I kind of shifted a little bit in terms of I still play classical music, but obviously playing jazz, but it's still playing my instrument. So yeah, I definitely feel I also feel more and more that I am responsible to, or at least trying to be a resource for other people. So that often means with my sacred music, answering questions from emails I'll get from music directors or who are trying to use jazz in their weekly services, or writing out piano parts for my pieces, which I hate doing. It's a pain. Takes a long time, really does, rather than just writing chords and melody for a lead sheet so that other people can use them. So I feel more, rather than thinking, wow, where's my next gig coming from? Or, although of course that happens too, but trying to feel that I'm part of a larger community.
I do think that music, whether it's jazz or whether it's sacred worship music, I think music has an uncanny way of bringing people together. How do you see your compositions as doing just that?
Well, I can give you one really specific example. So a few years ago, I think it was the beginning of 2017, there was a call for scores that was put out on some Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and by a couple of choral composers in the Minneapolis area, one of them, Abby Batinas, who is a pretty well-known choral composer. And Abby had said that she wanted to put together a justice choir songbook for choirs or just gatherings of people who wanted to sing social justice songs, but like she would notice, for instance, that a lot of people would know "We Shall Overcome" and nothing else. So they were seeking songs for that were for the current moment, but that anybody could sing, that did not need to be accompanied necessarily by, say, a keyboard instrument, or perhaps they could be, but wouldn't be necessary to. That would be simple enough in terms of range, and for anyone to sing. So I just felt like I just wanted to try to write something. So I sat down at my piano and I wrote this little tune, kind of like with a gospel feel, in about 5 minutes. And after that, I should say that 5 minutes, that's after having worked as a church music director for many years and writing tons of congregational music and really learning how to write for groups to sing. Then, for the words, I looked at "Lift Every Voice and Sing." And I looked at the first verse of that tune. And I started making lists of nouns and verbs that were positive things like play, hold, walk. And so I started writing from that. And I wrote this song called "We Walk in Love." So the first verse, the lyrics are, "We walk in love, united in purpose. We join our hands and lift up one voice. We speak the truth with strength and compassion, resounding with love, with courage and joy." And there were 3 verses, and I didn't even write SATB parts. I just wrote, I wrote the words and the melody. I recorded myself singing, playing it at home, and I sent it in. And then I got an email back from people on the, committee for choosing the songs for the songbook. And they said, "Please, we love your harmony. Would you please write out 4 parts?" So I did that. So they accepted the piece in the songbook. It's free under a Creative Commons license for anyone to use for non-commercial purposes. And the song was released, I say released kind of in quotes, because this was online. With the songbook, they were releasing one song at a time. The release happened about a week before the violence in Charlottesville happened. And immediately, I would say within 2 days after that, I started getting emails from people I didn't know at all, who said, "My friend downloaded, your song, or they found it, and I'm in Charlottesville, and, thank you for your song," because we had people who wanted to do something together or sing together, and we didn't know what to sing. And I have gotten scores of emails like that about this piece. It's been sung, I think, because I don't even know where it gets sung half the time, by hundreds of choirs. It was done at the St. Olaf College Festival Choir a few years ago. There were 1,000 high school students who sang it. The parents who were there sang it. At the 60th anniversary of the Little Rock 9 in Arkansas at that high school, their choir director programmed it for his kids to sing. And nursing home attendants write me and say, we were singing this at the nursing home. Churches. And that song, I think, more than anything else, I think it's something about both the lyrics and the tune itself being simple enough and memorable enough for people to sing it. And then it doesn't need the harmony, but if the harmony comes in, that enriches it even more. I think that song has really brought a lot of people together.
And just as it has enriched their souls, how do experiences like that, whether it's the songwriting process or being able to share this with others, how do those experiences enrich your own soul?
I definitely feel that when I get an email from someone telling me about their experience with this song, it encourages me to keep going, to keep writing, to also to even trust that I'm on the right path. It's because it would be very easy. For instance, I know this from composing a lot. So I've gotten a lot better at trusting that if I hear something, like it's probably there for a reason and I should write it down or record it. And, to me, this song, the lyrics are not super complicated, but it doesn't need to be. And the tune doesn't need to be harder than it is. And what I wish still is that more choir directors or whoever is singing this would let me know that they're singing the piece, because, I find videos on YouTube sometimes of it, which is wonderful, but actually having the communication with someone who's doing it, it just, again, helps me to feel more connected and is really encouraging.
There is another kindred spirit that has inspired you quite a bit through her own songwriting, her own performances. And as it turns out, where you are living now in Pittsburgh, that was her home too for some time. When we're speaking of Mary Lou Williams. Before the interview, I was trying to express how I am not near as educated on her works and experiences as you are. But let's start with this question, because there are a couple of projects specifically that either have been released or are in the works right now. How have you been inspired by Mary Lou Williams? Why is her life and legacy so important to you?
I remember the exact moment when I started to learn about Mary Lou Williams, and this kind of answers your question, I think. It was in 2000, and the late Dr. Billy Taylor, jazz pianist, had invited me to perform at the Kennedy Center at the Mary Lou Williams Women in Jazz Festival. And of course, I was super excited and I said yes. And then I was like, guess what? I don't know anything about Mary Lou Williams, except that she's a great pianist and composer. And I don't know her compositions. And I can honestly say, I still think that most jazz musicians even don't know her compositions. They just kind of know of her reputation and that she was a great early big band arranger. And then she wrote some sacred music. But at the time, I didn't even know about her sacred music. So I first, actually, before I heard her music, I started reading and then at the time new biography of her by Linda Dahl called Morning Glory. And through reading that, I found out that she had written 3 jazz masses. She had converted to Catholicism in midlife when she was 47, and had this whole liturgical music period. And that's the first thing that got me, because I had just written 2 jazz masses at All Angels Church. I was writing or arranging for weekly services there, pretty much every week. And so I started seeking out her music and went out to Rutgers University, to the Institute of Jazz Studies. That's where I really heard more of her sacred music. But her instrumental music, I was kind of just going, all over the map at the beginning, because she had a over 60-year career, and she doesn't sound the same from 1934 to even 1952. So the first thing that caught me was the depth and the range of her playing, and how she played so many different styles within jazz, but she was always, I think, very rooted in the blues, and she was always swinging. I mean, a super hard swinging player. And those were the things that really attracted me. And then when she started doing her sacred music, she always said that the purpose of her music was what you just asked me about, was to bring people together in love. And she really believed that jazz was a spiritual music, no matter whether or not it had lyrics, say that had spiritual content, or were played in a church or played on the sidewalk or played in a community center or a club. She really believed that it had the power to heal people. And she communicated that not just through her playing, but through how she treated other musicians, through her charitable work, through her really pushing to get her music done at certain places, her desire to do it in so many churches. So that's a little bit about how she's been an inspiration to me.
Tell me a couple of ways that you have been able to help carry on her legacy and to share her story.
Well, I have 2 projects that are going to be coming out later this year that relate directly to Mary Lou Williams. So one is I have my own biography of her coming out on August 15th. It's called Mary Lou Williams, Music for the Soul, and a Catholic publisher called Liturgical Press is publishing that. It's up for pre-order now. And I've had a lot of people say, well, what's going to make your book different from, there's 2 other biographies about Williams. And one of the things that I really take very seriously in my book that I haven't seen anyone else write about is how much Mary Lou was sustained, I think, by her friendships with nuns, with priests, with her letter writing. I mean, it's something that I don't think gets talked about with her very much, but I found letters of over 20 years, like 20-year periods that she wrote to various nuns, which is super interesting. But it's also just an overview of her life and her music, as well as my perspective from having played so much of her music. I also just recorded a new trio and quartet recording of all Mary Lou Williams music. It's going to be called Force of Nature, and it will be on the MCG Jazz label. MCG is Manchester Craftsmen's Guild. It's a venue here in Pittsburgh, really important, both to just the national jazz community and to Pittsburgh jazz musicians in particular. So that we're just starting the mixing process now. It's probably going to it has about 13 tunes on it, and we're aiming to release it at the beginning of October. And both of those things, but especially right now, since you can pre-order the book, I have all that info at my website at deannajazz.com.
You mentioned Pittsburgh, and that is a very special place for you because it is now home for you. You took a leap. You left Manhattan, which I'm sorry that I now know you after you have left Manhattan. But anyway, you took a leap. You went to Pittsburgh. You bought a home, and you're going to start an exciting new chapter in your life. Deanna, how do you hope to grow not only as an artist, but a person in this next chapter of your life?
Well, one reason that I came to Pittsburgh, besides the fact that I'm also a new PhD student at the University of Pittsburgh in jazz studies, the people here really drew me to Pittsburgh. I would say over the last 2 years, I don't think, maybe I came to Pittsburgh once before December of 2018 was really the first time I spent any time here. And I found people to be so welcoming here. The jazz community, especially, but even like I got to play with the Pittsburgh Symphony playing Mary Lou Williams's music about 2 years ago now. And even though we're in the pandemic and, it's hard not to see people here so much, I hope that I can really develop deep friendships here and be more rooted here than I have been even in my 23 years in Manhattan. I feel more, and this is probably partially buying a house, which I did not expect to be able to do so soon, but I almost feel more of a sense that I can breathe more easily. That I have space. I have space to do my work. I have space to dream about what I want to do. And I have space to make time for other people. I'm hoping that this will lead to, different things in my own work and composing and playing that I haven't dreamed of yet. But I also hope that I just feel more like I can have a fuller life here.
Deanna Witkowski, our guest during In Studio from Simply Timeless. Be sure and visit her website, deannawitkowski.com. Special thanks to Deanna for making time to speak with me, and a word of thanks to you, our listener, for joining us. Until we meet again, I'm Jay Daniels. This is In Studio from Simply Timeless.